I know some of you understand what I mean when I say tolerance. I had to pick 3 T's. Technology, talent, and tolerance. I probably should have called it 2 T's and an I. Technology, talent, and inclusiveness. But that's what I mean. And in Flight of the Creative class, I say that. Proactive inclusion. A diverse society. Why? Not just because it's a good thing to do, not just because it's a moral thing to do, not just because it's ethical, because it's economically the imperative. In Flight of the Creative class, I talk about the real challenge facing my country, the United States. Why did the United States grow? All these BS answers. I'm sorry. It had a big market. It had a lot of raw materials. And then you get to the truly, xenophobic ones. Whether it's a Protestant work ethic or American ingenuity. Come on. The reason America grew was one, we attracted the best and brightest people in the world. We kind of stumbled on that. Whether it was the Scotsman Andrew Carnegie who built the steel industry or the Hungarian Andrew Grove who built the semiconductor industry. You go to Silicon Valley today, go find an American. How many Americans won Oscars for acting? 0. Look at our economy. It's built on the backs of Europeans and then Asians and now Indians. 50% of all the companies founded, not the workforce, it's much higher, the founders of the high-tech technology companies in Silicon Valley are foreign-born, whether that's eBay or Hotmail or Yahoo or Google. It's this ability to attract people because the United States was an open country. And that's what I wrote Flight of the Creative class. The global competition for talent. The regions and countries that would win, and I said, you guys have a tremendous opportunity, and Scandinavia has a tremendous opportunity, and Canada has an awesome opportunity because the United States was restricting its borders with this homeland security craziness. So it opens up the possibility for the rest of the world to say, we can grab a piece of what your historic advantage has been. Because diversity is the key to economic growth. The first principle is every single human being is creative, which leads to the second principle. Creativity does not care for, it will not abide by, it does not comprehend the social categories we have imposed upon ourselves. Creativity, as any mother or father knows, comes equally in both genders. So if we live in a society which is male-biased, it's insane. Creativity comes equally in both genders. Creativity comes equally, spreads itself across all races, ethnicities, and nationalities. It doesn't care if you're white, black, brown, Asian, Latino, Hispanic. It cuts across. Creativity doesn't care who your parents were. You can be a poor person. My parents had virtually no money. You can come from a low-income family. You can come from a ghettoized neighborhood, and all that creativity is there. Often it's being channeled. Not in the most productive way, but it's there, and it's trying to find its way out. I can tell you this. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood, there was more creativity in the kids I grew up with who've been left behind than the professors I met at MIT, and that's the God's truth. It's the God's truth. Left behind, wasted. Wasted. It doesn't care if you're young or you're old. And this is really important. Creative people, and there's great research on this. Some of us are very creative. They call it conceptual creativity. In a very young age. A Stephen Jobs, a Paul McCartney, a John Lennon, a Jimi Hendrix. Others are pragmatically creative. We build and build and build, and we become creative much more in later years. Creativity doesn't care if you're able-bodied or physically disabled. Everybody is creative. Diversity, cognitive diversity, intellectual diversity, ethnic and racial diversity, they all go together. The economic winners are the ones that allow people to come together. I'll tell you a story. I just learned about Microsoft opening up a new lab. A new lab. It was in Seattle, in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, but with the Homeland Security Bush mania, right, insanity, close the borders, put everybody under an X-ray. We got to go through it all the time, Ron and I. It's horrible, and I apologize. I do. As an American, I apologize. But we moved to Canada, sorry. But that restriction, that closing off, Microsoft couldn't get the visas for its people to come and be scientists, developers, software developers. So they opened up a new laboratory right across the border in Vancouver, right across the border, not very far away. And we're going to do a case study. But what we learned just in our preliminary discussions, of course it was across the border, easier to get the visas, easier to get people from all over the world to come. But in Vancouver, because it's very diverse, Vancouver and Toronto are the two most social and ethnically diverse cities on the planet. What they learned in Vancouver is the people there knew how to manage different kinds of people. They didn't care if you were Asian or Danish or Swedish, again from China or India. They didn't care if you were young or old. They didn't care if you're gay or straight or trans or whatever it was. They were fine managing anyone. And what Microsoft said is it needed to have managers, and that's why it located there. It needed to have people who knew how to manage all different kinds of people. Diversity, tolerance, openness, they're not just the right thing to do. They're the economic imperative. The places that can attract the widest range of people, maybe that was the Silicon Valley or New York in its day, but that's shifting today. And the places that can attract that widest range of people in the future, and I'll tell you this, and I think you know it, you don't have to be a big place to do that. And if you try to convince yourself that you have to be, you're wrong. Small places can do it. That's what I wrote Flight of the Creative Class about. I think this whole idea that the economic competitors of the 21st century are big states, big countries, is a nonsense. Oh, it's going to be the United States, or it's not going to be China or India. Baloney. China ranks, you rank 4th on the Davos Competitiveness Index. We rank 1st or 2nd in the United States. Canada ranks 5th or 6th. Sweden ranks 2nd or 3rd, whatever. China ranks 94th. India ranks 135th. Come on. These are the people who work in pre-industrial conditions. We looked at the world's population, 50% of us now in the world for the first time in human history this year live in urban locations. We looked at the distribution of economic activity and innovation. Just 25 megaregions in the world. 25 megaregions, the New York, Boston, Washington corridor, Greater London, Greater Tokyo, part of southern Italy, the area around Amsterdam. You can go on and on. 25 of those places account for 2/3 of all the world's economic output and 90% of the world's innovation. Place is the critical dimension of the creative age, and it's puzzling. Why would that be? Why would an age when factories no longer really matter, when raw materials no longer really matter, or being near a port or a physical facility no longer really matter? Because they're not the things that matter. A woman who moved to Toronto figured this out. Her name was Jane Jacobs. She died last year. She wrote several books on cities, probably the most important books on cities ever. Didn't go get a PhD, didn't even have a college degree. She just understood cities. And she said, not only the key to cities, but the key to economic growth has never been really understood. When a University of Chicago professor named Robert Lucas won the Nobel Prize, he said she deserves it. Because she identified the real driving force of economic growth, which is when people come together in cities, when we come together in groups, when we co-locate together. You see, it's not companies that drive economic growth. That's the mistake. Adam Smith was only half right. It's not companies that specialize in making everything from pins to cars. They can do things better and more efficiently. Where new ideas come from, where innovation comes from, where new sources of growth come from, are clusters of creative people living together in cities. Robert Lucas gave them a name. For anyone who's economic, he called it a Jane Jacobs externality. It is the basic motor force of economic growth. All of us coming together in localities, together to grow, to build, to innovate. And so in my new book, well, I talk about this in Rise, but in my new book, Who's Your City?, I say the following. In this kind of world, where creativity is the driving force, where economic growth comes from innovation, the most important decision in your life is where you choose to live.